of savory and unsavory stories about Alain that I thought I could share with people.
No.
But then again, maybe someday you will introduce me, so I will invest in my karma and just stick to the script. So Alain has earned his PhD at the University of Montreal, where he worked with Igor Melchuk. He's been a major figure in the meaning text theory framework for all this time, for maybe 40 years already. He's been working at the University of Montreal for several years, where I had the great pleasure of attending his lectures. And now he's at the University of Lorraine, the ATILF lab, where he's heading what I think is the most interesting lexicographic work on French currently, the lexical network of French. I view him as one of the greatest French linguists alive currently. Yeah, I've never told you. But I do think that, and so we're lucky to have him today. And his talk is a good continuation for the previous talks, because he's also going to talk about idioms. So go ahead.
Correct. Three things. I worked during the PhD, I worked also with Lydia Jordanskaya and Igor Melchuk. And then I worked at the National University of Singapore, which was very important for me. And then there's something else, but I forgot. So. Okay, thank you, François. And thank you, Auxi, for the invitation. You asked me to come, I cannot say no. It's always a pleasure to see you and to do things with you, whether it's work or drink wine. Okay, so I start right away. So this title, What Happens When an Idiom Splits Apart, grammatical mistake has been corrected. That is still in the program. The split is in the preterite, I'm sorry, but it should be like this. And I'm not too sure it means that actually I don't know really what I'm heading for by presenting this to you. There are things that are very fuzzy for me. The only thing I'm sure of, but absolutely sure of, is that the splitting of idiom is something that exists, and that's very important. But for each individual cases we'll be talking about, I have my doubts. Well, except for a few of them, but I have my doubts. So you may disagree with many things I will say. So first of all, I will connect with the first presentation we had this morning, because I'll be talking about idioms, collocations, and some slippery phrasemes. Phrasemes will be for phraseological expressions. So that will be the theoretical part of my presentation that is otherwise much more applied and practical or lexicographical, if you want. And then I will introduce that process of what we termed phraseological split that I think is so important. And here I connect with the second talk by Begonia, because it has to do with lexical dynamics, so things happening in the lexicon. And I will also talk about the problem of lexicographically modeling those idiom splits, and that will be a way also for me of showing a little bit what our lexicography is and the kind of lexicography we do in Nancy is. So very quickly, our theoretical and descriptive background at ATILF is, of course, explanatory combinatorial lexicology and lexicography. The two have to come together. We cannot do anything in terms of lexicological research if it is not based on lexicographic description. So it will be very important. But what's a bit original, maybe for some of you who know about ECL, explanatory combinatorial lexicology, is that it's a lexicography of lexical networks with the type of formal model that have been termed lexical systems, for lack of a better word. But it's good because it's lexical and it's a system. So it's an alternative to dictionary modeling. So those are not dictionary, but if you want like virtual dictionaries, you can generate dictionaries if you want textual description out of those lexical networks. Very clearly, I venture outside the theory's comfort zone, so I may crash very badly when presenting things, because I'm talking about lexical dynamics, and there's not much on lexical dynamics in meaning text theory in general. One says there's not much, there's virtually nothing that is really specific, that I know of, okay? That is, if you want some descriptive tools or some research or focusing on lexical dynamics, that I cannot really base what I say on things that have already been conceptualized quite well. And also I'm dealing with unstable lexicographic or lexicological or lexicographic entities. And so, you know, often people in lexicological approaches, they say, okay, I'm going to describe these lexical fields. You come up with definitions, you come up with descriptions, etc. But because people, just deal with dozens of lexical units at a time, and sometimes only 2 or 3, this problem of the fact that there are things moving around, there are changes taking place, etc. You can just sweep it under the carpet and do as if it doesn't exist, because you are just dealing not with a system, but with a few units. So anybody who is working in a major lexicographic project, like for dictionaries, Longman or whatever, knows that this is an issue, because every year almost you have to publish a new edition of your dictionary because there are so many changes. On the radio, on TV, people always talk about the fact, oh, this year in the Petit Robert or Larousse, this is a list of words introduced. But in fact, it's not only this lexical dynamics and change. It's not only a word that you have to put in the dictionary. It's actually the polysemy of vocables that's evolving, the syntactic behavior of lexical units that is also evolving. So if you have really a lexicographic project and it is used daily by people, then you cannot ignore this. But us, more theory-oriented lexicographers, would tend to ignore it. So I'm not very well equipped. I'm not very competent about that. Probably among you guys are people who know much more than me. So, and on top of that, I will try to use English examples. I will use a lot of French examples, but I want to use English examples. And really, my English is too poor for me to be able to really have a good feeling and a good intuition about what I'm going to talk about. Okay, I have an intuition sometimes I don't even. So, sorry in advance if I say a lot of nonsense. Let's start with definitions, because I agree with Cliff, definitions, and whether it's definitions of lexical units, normal lexical units, or definition of terms, because if we define a term like any lexical unit, we actually bolt a notion. If a term is not defined, we haven't got the notion, which means we haven't got the corresponding concept at the same time. So a few notions, and I will just display definitions that we worked on with Melchuk while preparing a book on lexical functions. I will use some material sometime in terms of definition of theoretical aspects. So I say the book is to appear by this under-evaluation, but I promise you, if it's rejected, in any case, we'll put it somewhere on the internet, because anyway, we are targeting a free publication. So hopefully the publisher will accept that in a way or another it will be freely available soon. It's finished. Okay, let's start with defining phraseme, because we're not going to hop from one term to another, etc. And I'm very bad at giving an overview of a terminology across approaches, etc. I need precise notions for what's coming now. So we use the notion of phraseme, and here we talk about the lexemic phraseme. There was this question raised earlier, whether, what was the term used? Not precisely multi-word expression, but idioms. Can an idiom be only one word? So I believe a phraseme can be made up of one lexical unit. But this definition is not for those phrasemes. But I give you an example. is, and Melchuk would probably disagree with that, but for me, for example, allô, in French, is a phraseme. It is a phraseme because it's a constrained combination of two lexical signs. You have the lexical unit allô in French, pronto in Italian, etc. And you have a prosody. And it's constrained. So if you know allô in French, you have to know the whole range of prosodies you can use with it. So, of course, allô is a bit like in English. Apparently, you can say anything you want. Allô? 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 Okay, you know you can vary, but this is part of the combinatorial property of allô that you have to do, you can do that. But if you take, for example, in Japanese, moshi moshi, you don't say moshi moshi. Moshi moshi has to have a neutral prosody. It doesn't work really if you... So you have to know that. So it's a phraseme, you know, because a prosody is a linguistic sign. It's a suprasegmental sign, but it's a linguistic sign. So as long as there are more than just one sign, and they are constrained, mutual constrained on their use, it will be a phraseme. But here, the definition is for a lexemic phraseme, which is, if you want, an expression. So it's a complex lexemic expression so that the selection of at least one of its lexemes by the speaker is not free. It is constrained by another lexeme of the expression. So the definition is not at all statistical. It's not about interpretation. Is there any opacity or whatever? It's the perspective of the speaker. So the speaker is actually producing this expression. And if you want to explain what's going on, you have to acknowledge the fact that if you look at lexicalization there in the expression, at least one lexical unit has been chosen according to another lexical unit of the expression. That's what we will call phraseme. So now phrasemes exist in the language, but there are many alternative notions with alternative terms, but that's the idea. So it's very important. It's a speaker's perspective. It's not statistical. Statistics is just a consequence of this, because therefore there is a functional affinity between those lexical elements. Therefore, if you statistically study how they occur in corpora, etc., you will find some form of statistical affinity. Okay, but this is a symptom. That is not the thing itself. Okay. So examples: wide awake. When the speaker says wide awake, if you want to explain the presence of wide here, you have to say that awake is telling the speaker that if he wants to intensify awake, to say very awake, but you may choose wide. And for other lexical units for which it could be logically possible, it is not. So it's a mutual constraint. That's what we call. So a free expression is not free. Nothing is ever free in natural languages. But eat potatoes is free, is not free, because you have to know that eat is direct transitive, so you can use potato. But it is free in the sense that I want to talk about a certain action that I can lexicalize by eat. I want to talk about a certain kind of food that I can lexicalize by potato, but I don't have to look at left or right or before and after what I'm just generating in order to decide, to choose a lexical unit. So a phraseme is basically a non-free expression in that sense. Good? So then, if it may not be an interesting notion, but here is a notion. You've got the term, the definition of the term, more or less, and therefore you've got the concept, so you have a notion. Notion is an association between a term and a concept. So, of course, it may not be useful. For example, if this doesn't exist in natural languages, then there is no phraseme in English or in French. But the fact is, as it was said earlier, they are everywhere. They are all over the place. About everything in natural languages is about phraseology and phrasemes. And this is because language is a set of linguistic signs and rules to combine those linguistic signs. And a linguistic sign is signified, a signifier, and a restricted co-occurrence. When you learn a linguistic sign, you have to learn the set of all the little tiny rules that constrain its combination. So if it is at the level of the linguistic sign, it is the genes of natural languages, then it should not be surprising that it's everywhere at all levels of language production. So this is the notion of phrasing, and now that we have the notion of phrasemes, it's pretty easy. So what is an idiom with this meaning of idiom, again? So it's a phraseme, so a non-free expression. So it has to correspond to the constraint we just mentioned. That is semantically non-compositional. So sometimes it's easy. If we think of green thumb as an idiom, it's clearly semantically non-compositional because its meaning is not the combination of the meaning of green and thumb. Okay, in this case, it's what we call strong idiom, so it's pretty obvious. But there are also weak idioms like shopping center. You have somehow shopping and center in the meaning of shopping center, so it takes a bit more work to demonstrate that it's not semantically compositional, which means that you can find in the meaning of the idiom the meaning of all its lexical stocks, but if it's an idiom, it means there's something more. Okay, so it will still be an idiom. In that sense, it will be semantically non-compositional. So we will call idioms semantically non-compositional phrasemes. It's okay? That's cool. Okay, a collocation now. There are also many meanings of collocations. You will notice the definition is not at all statistical. And again, it takes the speaker's perspective. I don't invent anything here. Melchuk has put forward this idea that the perspective of the speaker is so important. And actually, I started really understanding meaning text linguistics when I understood that from the beginning I had been indoctrinated to take the addressee's perspective, the decoding perspective. As soon as you look at things the other way around, then it's like a totally different object of study. So it's a compositional phraseme. So it's not an idiom. It's compositional, it's semantically compositional, and it consists of two, we simplify by saying two lexical units, L1 and L2. In fact, what is called the collocate doesn't need to be a lexical unit, it should be, say, a lexical entity. L1 is selected by the speaker freely, i.e. independently of any other lexical choice within the phraseme. Okay, so take wide awake, for example. Awake, you don't need to know that you are going to say why to say awake, because in any case you want to talk about the fact of being awake and you select it. And L2 is selected by the speaker to express a particular meaning. And this, in the book, we developed this. It's the idea that some meanings are meant to be collocational. There is a limited number of basic meanings that all languages have decided to express phraseologically for semiotic reasons. That would be an interesting discussion. So it is selected to express a particular meaning in combination with L1 as a function of L1, which means you have L1 and you know you want to add this meaning. So because you know you have L1, you will select L2 or all the possible L2s. This will be a collocation. So no statistics here. It's not a statistical notion. Of course, there is statistical affinity in the text. But again, this is a symptom of the fact that you are using here a collocation. So L1 is called the base of the collocation and L2 the collocate. So now we have two very clearly distinguished notions, idiom and collocation. And according to those definitions, there can be no doubt that they are two very different things. Okay? But of course, in natural languages, you have plenty of intermediary cases or problematic cases and all. But your question should be, do I consider it's an idiom or a collocation? I think it's a very bad attitude to say, well, this is not a clear-cut case, so maybe this distinction between idioms and collocation does not exist. Well, it exists because when, in most cases, you see a very strong difference between the different types of phrasemes, but there are always things in between. And that's what we are going to talk about today, because precisely there is an interplay between not so much the notion of idiom and the notion of collocation. The two notions are separated. But there is an interplay between idioms and collocations in natural languages. Okay? Or you can, if you want to just say something or whatever. Yes, sir?
Is it always two lexical units only?
Well, it is a base and a collocation, so it's always two parts. But you may have several, for example, the collocate can be an expression itself that is not even an idiom. It can be a free expression that's a collocate of a lexical unit. In this case, you have more than one lexical unit, but you have two parts. And the base has to be a lexical unit, a lexeme or an idiom, because an idiom can be the base of a collocation, of course. Okay? We'll see cases like this. So, also, you can have some double shot collocations. So you can have a collocation, and within the collocation there is another collocation. Okay? So this is always possible, because, for example, a collocate can control collocate. So you can have an expression where you have the base, it's collocate, and the collocate is the base of another collocation with its own collocate. If you take a collocate that is a full verb, like, I don't know, for example, to ride a bicycle. So ride a bicycle is a collocation. But of course I won't be able to think of anything like that, but to ride may have its own collocate. So if you produce an expression where you have ride with, say, an intensifier or something like that, bicycle, then you get a double shot collocation, because you have an expression that actually is, you know, you have like to do with Russian babushka, you have to just, you know, dismantle the whole thing. So this is possible also. So yeah, this is an oversimplification. But the two parts remain, and the base is a lexical unit. So some dictionaries, they do establish a clear distinction, and I disagree a bit with your analysis, of one of the cases you show, or maybe I didn't follow well or understand well. But I think for the Longman dictionary, it's very important. With the online version of the Longman dictionary, there was no longer this issue of how much paper are we going to use to produce a dictionary. So because they are very reasonable lexicographers, they say, we are producing an electronic dictionary, so let's not embed the description of idioms within the description of lexemes. Because an idiom is a lexical unit, so it should have its own entry. So collocations are described, and they are called collocations, and they are described under the entry for the base of the collocation. So in the entry for walk, the noun, walk, a walk, you have this table here with collocations. Go for a walk, have a walk, take somebody a dog for a walk, etc. Those are collocations of walk. Okay? And actually, maybe you could disagree with this list, but if you disagree, it will be by saying this is not a collocation, not because it's an idiom, but because I want to consider it a free expression. But there's no idiom here, I think. And if they have an idiom, like go walk down the aisle, then they have a separate entry. So you look inside the word list, electronic word list if you want, and there is an entry, it's an entry for a lexical unit, go walk down the aisle. And with its own description, but the description, you see, is not that bad. There is a definition, get married, there is an information about the fact that it's colloquial or informal, and you get some examples. Okay, so like for any good regular lexical unit, it has its own entries. So they make a clear distinction between the two. If they consider they really have got an idiom, then there is an entry for the idiom. And then, because it's a learner's dictionary, well, they believe they have to teach the restricted co-occurrence of lexical units. So they will hunt for collocations and present the collocation. Okay? So this corresponds actually to our approach to separate entries for idioms because they are just lexical units, and collocations should be described under or in the entry for the base of the collocation because it's a property of the base, a combinatorial property. Cool? And actually, yeah, they don't write idiom, but they mean idiom. They write collocations, but it's, well, maybe there's no need to say it's an idiom because they present it as a lexical unit with a definition, and clearly it's a phrase. It's not, formally it's a phrase, it's not a set of word forms or possible word forms. We're still fine? Okay. Now, so as I say, the two notions totally separated from a conceptual point of view. Those are two very different things when you think about it. A lexical unit and just a construct by the speaker, of course following the rules of the language, that in fact gravitates around one lexical unit and co-occurrences it controls. Now there are problems. So I take this one because this one I like it very much, and I have more intuition about this one than about other maybe idioms I will mention. So bite the bullet in English. So everybody is cool with bite the bullet. I was too lazy to propose a definition, but if I were not lazy, or if I take more time, I should propose a definition. That would be something, I don't think I've written a definition. It's like X bites a bullet on Y, X being faced with a difficult situation Y, which implies that he has to act in some sense and it will have bad consequences for him. He does what he has to do as regard to Y, something like that. That's what to bite the bullet means, and we can define it with standard definition and that we normally use. So I think, in fact, normally, each time we have something like that, if we hypothesize an idiom, we should define the idiom. We use analytical definitions. There are definitions, paraphrastic definition by next gender and specific differences. So that's why my first part was the definiendum. X bites on the bullet on Y. And then you've got the paraphrase with the central component and peripheral component. You'll see a few of them. I think normally it's unquestionable that it is an idiom. My intuition is that it is an idiom, but I'm not a native speaker. But I don't feel the need to say, oh, you think it's an idiom, but it's not. There are troubling facts, but I think still, now, today, I think it's still an idiom. But I may be wrong, okay? Precisely, I think only a native speaker and who is very attentive to what's going on in the language and who has a long experience of the language can really have a really reliable intuition about it. So it's a separate entry in the Longman. There is an entry as a lexical unit. And then in the American Heritage Dictionary and Oxford Advanced Learners Dictionary, there are two good dictionaries. You have an idiom section, just like we had a collocation section in the Longman, and where they list to bite the bullet. So they say, this is an idiom. So they all agree it's an idiom. But there are problems. Autonomization of the noun seems to contradict this. So you can have, like, if you look at this nominal phrase here, that's kind of derived from to bite the bullet. I argue that each of these options is a tough bullet to bite. Very difficult to think that here we use the idiom to bite the bullet. Well, we talk about something that we call a bullet, and we say, and bullet here seems to mean a difficult situation that's problematic for us, and we accentuate, we say it's tough, and then there is almost like you collocate what you do with this situation, you bite it, or you don't, or etc. So and this is very easy to find. So if it were just something I find somewhere, but if you take, I use the Coca corpus to make sure and kind of tune my search in order to find occurrences like that. And it's really very easy. And so this one was not in Coca, but in Coca I found many, and you can find it on the web. And you know I'm safe. It's an Australian website. And it comes from ANU. So those people, they know what they are doing. So there is a theoretical and practical question, because when I see that, I wonder, okay? But because my intuition about English is very limited, there are two cases, two possibilities. So you consider that one is a rhetorical figure. You know, the speaker, he just played with words, if you want, so, with the idiom, and then he used these idioms as if it were a collocation, if you want, in some sense. And then he developed on that, etc. It's always possible, and we do that all the time. If you crack jokes often, that's the kind of thing we do all the time also. And in this case, it's not really relevant for us, because it's all about rhetorics and the rules of rhetorics, etc. And it's not my area of study, and it's not something that has to do directly with lexicological and lexicographic description. Of course, we have to describe the meaning and the structure of to bite the bullet or bite the bullet. And then the rules, things that make this possible, have to do with rhetorics. And I don't know if it's a science, it's a discipline, but if it's a science, so maybe you can do formal rhetorics and be able to generate this kind of thing. I'm pretty sure some people do that. Or it is foreseen by the English lexicon and the grammar, which means the person who says that did not create something. It's not the speaker's creation, but it's just that according to the current state of the language, the lexicon is such and the grammar is such that is just using rules of the language and is producing something that is not a figure. It is clearly a phraseme, but it's not a figure because it's already in the language. So if it's already in the language, this concerns us. So this is the first case. Maybe bite the bullet is already no longer an idiom, or maybe it's in the process of generating a collocation of a lexical unit bullet. I don't know. It's okay? Okay, a more convincing case, because I think here the separation, the split has taken place already, but I still have a question mark, again, because break the ice, a very famous break the ice, because when you look at it, okay, most dictionaries, they list it as an idiom, and actually, list of idioms are very useful. There are a lot of things that are called list of idioms. So if you want to conduct a study, I'll talk about this at the end of the presentation, but I think taking list of idioms and scanning through the whole list of idioms and checking, this one, is this an idiom or a collocation? It's actually a good way to extract interesting cases, because each time I was given a list of idioms, maybe half or a third of those idioms were not idioms. And whether it's for French or English or often it's for pedagogical purposes, okay? And I'm talking about cases where people, they give a definition of idiom. They say it's something basically that's non-compositional, it's a lexical unit in itself. And still, so the troubling facts about break the ice, I mean, one thing that's very well known, that the passivization is totally free and unmarked and totally free. Okay, the ice is, was, has been, will be broken. And you know that when you have verb, direct object, idiom, yeah, sometimes you can passivize, but often you cannot, or it's a bit unnatural, or it's a bit forced. But break the ice is like, syntactically, there's a total autonomy of the direct object, because you can really lexicalize it as a subject of the passive form of the verb. And then there is a lexical paradigm of verbal components for the phraseme. You can use some other things that break the ice. Okay, sorry, the example is a bit long, but it's about Perrott and Baker. So those two politicians, they really have a problem with each other. And then, so you mentioned those two guys, and they just could not talk to each other. Bush was frozen, so there is a metaphor here. I mean, they play with the lexicalized metaphor. Into his unfavorably ratings, nothing he could do on his own would melt the ice. It's about to break the ice, okay? But he would need to melt the ice, not break. So you will find the use of other verbs than break, which starts to be problematic, okay? Also, you can find some real autonomy of the nominal component, and it's also very easy to find. This is Coca. I love to use Coca. It's in a series, and it has to do with, I don't know, Smash, but probably it's a TV series about TV series or something like that. Bombshell's mine, Jerry, and I'm going to take it all the way to the Tony, so Tony Awards. Without your help, stay away from my show. Am I clear? And here I thought the ice between us may be melting. We are very far from the idiom to break the ice, okay? So, champagne, what are we celebrating? The ice between us melting again. You know, and it's quite easy to find this. So, the status of to break the ice as an idiom is pretty much in question here, okay? But again, I cannot do this, I cannot come up with the final diagnostic about this by myself. I need to work with a native speaker because it's too difficult, really. It's okay? Okay. So if it were all about the separate sense of ice, maybe there is a lexical unit, ice. We don't want to think about it because we think of to break the ice, but why not? So it's interesting, if you look in the American Heritage Dictionary, you have a contradiction. You go to break, and then you have the list of idioms, break a leg and blah, 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 and break the ice. So to make a start, or second sense, to relax a tense and unduly formal atmosphere or social situation. So they really describe it as idiom with a definition. But in the entry for ice, the noun, you have meaning 8, extreme in friendliness or reserve. And obviously, they are talking about the ice of to break the ice, okay? So this, you could say it's a mistake. But actually, I would say I'm not that sure. Maybe that's the way we have to do things here. Because probably an idiom split is taking place. And in fact, it needs at this stage a double description. The problem being that normally this should be pointing to that. There should be something about the fact that we have two entities that seems to cohabitate, and one will win over the other probably. But at this stage, it's like this. So I found this very interesting because somehow you could say, but it's stupid, look, they're making a mistake. But on the other hand, you could say, maybe that's the best thing to do if it is true that something is happening. The ice is breaking somehow. The idiom is breaking. Okay? Now, a clear-cut case, and so don't doubt the idiom no longer exists. And because, actually, that was the third thing I wanted to correct. I'm not a linguist, lexicologist, lexicographer, but I have a definition of linguist that forbids me from considering that I'm a linguist in that sense. Here I can be sure because I'm a lexicologist and I worked a lot on French and I'm more or less native speaker of French, so I'm sure of that. Poser un lapin, so I will explain the problem with this, but it's a very well-known expression in French, and it's something that happens all the time to you, or that 20 minutes, I guess, not 20 seconds. Okay, it means to stand up somebody, okay? So he stood me up, il m'a posé un lapin. Literally, it means to put a rabbit to somebody. I mean, ask a native speaker of French why you say to put a rabbit to somebody. They say, well, it's an idiom, it's metaphorical for sure, but I don't know where this comes from. So it's an idiom in French dictionary and list of idioms, but it's not at all an idiom, okay? If you look at the linguistic facts, no way you can say it's an idiom, and it's been like that for decades, maybe, I don't know, more than a century. Okay, verbal paradigm, poser un lapin. So, you poser un lapin to someone, mais se prendre, se faire poser un lapin. There are many verbs you can use to mean that X is standing up Y, or Y is being stood up by X. Okay, so there are many verbs you can use, and there is really a total autonomy of lapin, contrary to what people think. Of course, it's more natural to use lapin with a verbal collocate, not necessarily poser, but it's very autonomous. So this is an old song by Bazán that everybody knows, Les copains d'abord. So, au rendezvous des bons copains, at the meeting of the good old friends, there was not often lapin. There was not often rabbit. If one of them was missing, it means he was dead. Okay? Si l'un d'entre eux manquait. So, lapin is used by itself, and it means the situation where there was an appointment and the person didn't come. No verb even, no, it's okay. And it's in 1965, and okay, I was already born, and I've known this song all my life, and I never thought that there was anything special that Brassens was doing here by using lapin. It was there in the language already, okay? And this one, appointment. When you cancel an appointment, it is preferable to let it known. The rabbit is not part of good manners, okay? So if this does not demonstrate that there is a lexical unit rabbit, okay, so it's absolutely clear that there used to be, or there is this unit rabbit, but it exists because there was an idiom poser un lapin. So there is a total autonomy of the nominal constituent, and it's even more interesting than that, because if you want to describe this meaning rabbit, there's no way you can put it back inside the vocable, the polysemy of the vocable lapin, because there's absolutely no semantic connection and all. So there's no doubt that they have to be related, because lapin is such a special word in French. I mean, the phonology, etc., it is a unique word, but no way you can put it in the vocable. It has to be described as a homonym. So what is the lexicological status of the relation between poser un lapin and lapin tout? And the question also is what kind of lexical dynamics is at stake? Because there's no doubt poser un lapin was an idiom. And now, so here comes the notion of phraseological split. So we coined the term with Marie-Sophie Posé. So she wrote a dissertation where she did an extensive study of lexicosyntactic structure of idioms that we encoded in the French lexical network. And then while working on this, we spotted plenty of interesting things. And one thing we spotted is this problem that would usually be described as idiom flexibility or something like that. But it's not flexibility, it's idiom disaggregation, if you want, or splitting. The idiom is turning into something different in this case. So we decided to work really on this seriously. We wrote a paper in 2020. It's in French, unfortunately. But the concept, really, the notion of a phraseological split, it's something we worked on, Marie-Sophie and I. So we could define this phraseological split this way. It's a process by which an idiom gives rise to a collocation such that one component of the original phraseme takes up all or part of the idiom's meaning, and this component functions as the base of the collocation. So, poser un lapin, poser, we don't care about it now. The meaning is lapin, and lapin is the base that takes poser as a collocate. I don't have much time now, so very quickly, I will go quickly. To give the cold shoulder, I will go very quickly through this. I just want to mention it, because probably centuries ago, this idiom gives the cold shoulder a split, and then you have an idiom cold shoulder, and that is very well described in all dictionaries as an idiom cold shoulder, and to get the cold shoulder, to give the cold shoulder treatment, etc., is very well established now in English. To give the cold shoulder, no doubt, is not an idiom. It used to be, and nobody is certain exactly what the metaphor was. There are different theories about that. It doesn't matter. And also, what's really spectacular is that the noun cold shoulder, the idiom noun cold shoulder, that took up all the meaning of give the cold shoulder, have given rise to a verb, to cold shoulder someone. Okay, so you even have a verbal incarnation of this noun cold shoulder. So this is just to show you that for an English speaker, it's very normal because this took place such a long time ago. But still, there are mistakes in describing it. Okay, what we have to do in cases like this, that's why I insist on definition. We say, yeah, cold shoulder exists. So if, lapin exists. The first thing we have to do is to come up with a definition. For me, that would be my definition of cold shoulder. So cold shoulder given by X to Y, and friendly attitude of person X towards person Y, whom X knows, that expresses X reproach to Y for something bad that X believes Y has done. Okay, it's surely not perfect, but it's quite kosher in terms of analytical definition. Next genus and specific differences. And this tells us, okay, you have a lexical unit that means this, so now let's describe the lexical unit once we have the definition. So the possible chain of events is what I've talked about. So the issues with phraseological splits, it's not just something, a funny thing, something amusing in language. It's an ongoing process in the lexicon, and it involves a significant number of idioms. It cannot be disregarded. It's an important process because it permanently generates new lexical units and collocations and new lexical units. So it has to be taken care of in lexical models. Remember, American heritage, they do something, but we have to know what we are doing. And it's a natural process. It obeys linguistic laws, and phraseological split, idiom split can be anticipated, okay, based on some criteria. And also, it's interesting and important because I think only near-native speakers can really handle this. Because to get a feeling of the micro changes in the lexicon, 10 minutes. Oh, but then this includes the questions? No. Oof. Okay. So I show you more recent splits that are still in progress. I don't know. Quickly on this because it's not necessarily very interesting, but the famous idiom pass the torch. Well, you have a lexical unit torch number 2. You can see everywhere that can be used without a verb, so made it the cultural capital as well. Here's how they seized the torch from Europe. I mean, it's very natural, and you can find this very easily. So maybe it's still in progress, but precisely this I cannot tell. And maybe it also varies from one dialect of English to another. This one I know all about it. Boire la tasse, so it means to accent. There's no verb for that in English. Funny. English well, they are people of the sea and of the water, so they're all good swimmers, so they never boire la tasse. Means to accidentally swallow water while swimming. It's very specific. And literally it means to drink the cup. Okay? Everybody will say boire la tasse is an idiom. Okay? But it's not at all an idiom. Look, for inspiration, with the head turned upwards, it will be better if it allows you to avoid the cup. La tasse. Okay, so there is tasse too, that means the fact of accidentally swallowing the wine. And drink the cup is just a collocation with one verb, one possible collocate. Okay, now what's very exciting, because it's ongoing, it's everywhere. If you start describing idioms, I mean, is it an idiom or a collocation? Again, the notions are very clearly distinguished, but it's a natural thing. So I believe that some idioms are kind of provoking the split. You know, they have something in their form and meaning that makes it something to be expected. So, for example, one important thing is that it matches a collocational pattern. So, for example, if you have an idiom that is a verbal phrase, with a verb that could be a realization verb, lexical function real, and the noun could be the base of the collocation, then that stuff could split. Because, in fact, there is formally something in it that makes it a collocation. If you look at it, une tasse de thé, a cup of tea, what is the verb you use? But it looks free, but still phraseological. It means to do with the cup of tea what you are supposed to do. And the verb is to drink. But sometimes you have several, like for example, for soup, do you say manger sa soupe ou boire sa soupe? And in all languages, so you can see that because it means to do what you are supposed to do, it's a phraseological meaning, and then it's a lexical function real. So boire la tasse already had this structure. And in actual fact, it came from a collocation. Boire une tasse de thé. So the syntactic part of the expression that corresponds to the would-be based of a collocation can host part of all of the meaning. So if there is a way to think of either a metaphor or a way that you could feel that this can go into the base of the collocation, then this will allow. So, for example, I can hypothesize things. So I know, for me, to pull the plug in English is an idiom. Everybody calls this an idiom. To pull the plug on the project, it means to cancel or to stop the project. It could really be a collocation, because already it's a collocation. What do you do with the plug? Real one of plug. You insert the plug in Y. X inserts the plug. An anti-real one, you pull the plug. Okay, those are collocate. So it's an anti-real one of plug used by X and Y. So it has everything it takes so that a noun can appear that would mean fact that Y is in activity, the plug. And then you pull it. I don't think there is insert, but so I don't know if there is a split taking place here, but it's a very good candidate. And okay, so now I'm going to formally explain what's going on quickly. So we work with boire la tasse. So this is the semantic representation of boire la tasse. To make it easier, I wrote the names of the semantims in English, so it's easier to read. And I didn't put theme ring organization, Marie, because I wanted to make it simpler, so I just identified the dominant node. So it's about swallowing. Boire la tasse means swallowing. So X boit la tasse, X swallows water inadvertently, while X is swimming. So that's the definition. If you want, it's a semantic network representation of the kind of definition I used before. So what's going on? The speaker wants to express this, okay? You are a speaker of English, learning French, 5 minutes, and therefore if you learn your French well, you will lexicalize all this with the idiom boire la tasse, and this is a deep syntactic tree. So X, boire la tasse, first deep syntactic accent of boire la tasse, and then you produce the syntactic structure. X, subject of boire, tasse, direct object, tasse number one, and le, because the idiom tells you that you have to use the definite article. But now it's different. The split took place, and what you do, you lexicalize all this with tasse number two. That means exactly this, and then you use a support verb. This is the upper one lexical function that takes the predicative noun as first complement and the first accent as subject, so the upper one of tasse, and that's what you are going to say. And you will choose any upper one, boire la tasse, se prendre la tasse, etc., avaler la tasse. There are many that you could use. And of course, you come up with a surface syntactic tree where this new lexical unit is used. So that's two very different processes, and we have reached a stage where I think the two cohabitate. I forget about, let's go, skip this. No. Yeah, I just wanted to show you, it's quite interesting, for example, if you compare what you get because of this polysemy or homonymy problem. So, for example, in the French lexical network with Lapin, you see this homonyme Lapin 2 that's connected with rendezvous, meeting, etc., controls the semantic network that's, of course, disconnected from the other lexical unit, because we decide that there's no way to put it in the vocable. Because the problem is that if you put it in the vocables of which Lapin number one, the rabbit, is a basic lexical unit, the definition has to show a connection, a metaphor, an extension, anything. But it's absurd. Of course, we cannot do it. So you get this, but it's obviously very different for tasse, because once there is a split, this tasse, that means the fact of swallowing water while swimming, in fact, you could say as if you were drinking a cup of something, of water. So, of course, you will describe it as metaphorical. So this guy here, he will be very naturally and nicely inserted inside the vocable tasse, cup. So very different situations, but in both cases, the same principle behind the, okay. How many minutes? One? 1 minute. So I propose to call, I think there are in the language those idioms that are ready to be the target of the victim of the split. Propose to call them fragile idioms. Because we have the term weak idioms for idioms that contain the meaning of all their lexical components. Like nuclear power plant is a weak idiom because the meaning of all those guys is there, plus more. In French, we say centrale nucléaire. We say usine à gaz, not centrale, for a factory that was producing gas, etc. So those are idioms. So I propose fragile idioms. I mean, I don't have a much elaborated terminology for this. And in our paper, you can check, we had a very interesting case. So very, very quickly, it's so exciting. Because I think that's why we should study those things. Tailler Invest, in French, so this is a network, but Tailler Invest, we have the definition here. I can show you the definition. So roughly, what does it mean? Ex taille une veste, literally it means to cut a jacket for someone or to someone. And it means that ex taille une veste cuts a jacket to Y, X criticized Y about something, and in public. It has to be in public. So you are ridiculed a bit, you know. In a kind of a nasty manner, you want to harm socially the person. and then you actually come up with an argumentation. It's not just like a joke you make. It's a bit more than that. And then your intention is to do something bad to Y. So it's a very complex meaning, but it is to criticize with this kind of bad intention. I cannot explain. We can expect that there is a metaphor, but we don't know why. What is very interesting is that we have two lexical units, veste in French. Oh, putain de veste hier soir, bloody vest or jacket last night. Suppose you played football and you were totally defeated. It was a very bad thing. You call it une veste. It's a defeat. So it is not the result of the split from this, because this meaning vest did not swallow the meaning of taillé in veste. But you feel that it's a split. You feel like it, but no. So there is something strange here, but anything can happen. So it's as if there was a split, but while splitting, it's a bit like in the movie The Fly, you know, when the guy tried to transmute from one pod to another, but there is a fly with him in the pod, and he ends up becoming a monster and all. I think that there was a split of taillé in veste, but something happened, and what you get is not really veste, that is the base of a collocation that's a result of taillé in veste, but some kind of monster. That means something else, very close, so just like in The Fly. And just like in The Fly, where the guy becomes worse and worse, it even developed its polysemy. So the young people in France, Quebec, I don't know, they use it a lot in veste for a guy, mainly a guy, when he tried to cruise a girl, and then, you know, he get rejected quite badly and all, and ça s'appelle une veste, ou un râteau also. So you see, there are a lot of things like that we really don't understand, and I think it would be nice to have a model of this. So I'm finishing now, and those are the three texts I mentioned previously. Maintenant, vous pouvez me tailler une veste.
Do you hear me in the microphone? No. How do I
speak louder?
No, because we're streaming.
We can hear. So
Yeah, if you speak loudly, they will hear you.
I can't speak loud enough to be heard on YouTube.
But I don't know YouTube. I never met a guy, so... Use this?
No, because I want to take the questions with this microphone. And now you hear it. Okay. The point is not that you hear me, but we're streaming this, so I want to take the questions in this microphone. So any questions, please?
Thank you for a very interesting talk. I've got plenty of little questions, but I think main thing was that just struck my attention was you said some meanings are meant to be collocational. Could you please comment on that? What meanings are meant to be collocational?
If I were Melchuk, I would say there are exactly 36 meanings. Well, they have been identified, so I can give you a list. Very intense is meant to be collocational. So if you want to say very intense, combine it with a noun, say, and you know the noun in the language you want to say it, and if you want to say very, you have to be warned that maybe there is a special way to say that. Okay, so for example, I don't know, amor, in Spanish, but amor in the sense of the feeling, okay? Not the person you love, not mi amor, but mi amor para, okay? I know amor, but what is the intensifier of amor in English? So if I want to say a very amor, I don't know. But in French, no problem. Amour fou, amour... passionné, oui, amour éternel pour la durée, etc. So intense, no matter the language you want to say intense next to a noun or a verb, you know that it won't be a free expression. If it looks free, you're lucky. Because maybe you have a joker or something like that, or in your mother tongue, it's the same word you use. So intense, no problem. You know, I don't know. In French, for example, for to sleep, there are many intensifiers. In English, to sleep like a log. But to nap like a log doesn't work. But to sleep like a log is to sleep very, etc., etc. Another one. Well, the support verb, which means a meaning that is zero, and the purpose of using the verb is just to turn the noun into a verbal construction. Okay? So you have a nap, you have a dream. In French, you make a dream, except in the second meaning of dream, the metaphorical meaning, where you can faire un rêve ou avoir un rêve. But for the first meaning, the thing at night, you have to say faire un rêve. That's why a French person speaking English would say, I made that dream last night that was incredible. And because it's a translation of j'ai fait ce rêve. So if it's a support verb, which means no meaning, but you need a verbal construction, it's a phraseological meaning. Meaning of doing what you are supposed to do with that thing. So for an object, meaning using the object. So you fly a plane, you ride a horse, or you ride a bicycle, but in French, on vole pas un avion, on pilote un avion, but in English you can also say to pilot. So this meaning, and there is a very good scene in France where Ross tries to convince Phoebe that she should use the bike that he gave her and say, if you don't use this bike, it's like you don't so if you don't ride this bike, it's like you don't play this guitar. This guitar is meant to be played, and this bike is meant to be ridden. Otherwise, the guitar is dying, you know, and is actually playing with real one. So that meaning. So there are meanings like that. There are a couple of, some are very recurrent, intensification, and you never know what will happen. And it's not a matter of logic, it's a matter of language. So basically you can intensify anything, any state of a person or whatever. Like for example, when you tell people you can intensify dead, they say, no, you cannot intensify. Either you're dead or not. How come you can be stone dead? Or dead as a doornail. And in French, red mort. Pregnant. I love pregnant. Because this is interesting. Because no, in English, you can use the joker. You can say very pregnant. It's perfect English. But in French, très enceinte is borderline. You say enceinte jusqu'au cou, up to the neck. So you can so there are meanings like that. We have the list. You can download the book when it will be published. You have all of those things described. And if you are impatient, write to me. I will send you the PDF.
Another question?
No, not him.
I have a question about these splits. So when you split an idiom, I wonder how independent, for example, in your example with boire la tasse, or une tasse, la tasse, and then there is...
Now you can say boire une tasse.
Yeah. So how, so the second meaning of la tasse, so how independent it is from idiom. So in order to know what the second meaning of la tasse, I need to know the idiomatic meaning, I think.
Yeah, that's
how,
my point, and that's actually I had to rush a bit, but it's my fault, it's not François' fault. But that's the issue. I actually don't know yet how we have to handle this. My gut feeling is that if it's an ongoing process, and it can be ongoing for a long time, because tasse has been used independently for many years. But I think it's still ongoing. It's not, you know, the scar is still there, if you want, or it's even bleeding a bit, or there's some pus, or I don't know what. And I think if we are in this phase of transition, the wise thing would be to say, you know, two things exist. There is an idiom that it's becoming obsolete, but it's not obsolete yet, but there has been this split, and now you have that noun. And therefore, I would love, I think, and it's possible to do it. And you have a definition for the idiom, a definition for the noun that will be almost the same, basically, another way. And then you have to connect them with lexical functions. And you have to have the person who is using your model know. So that's why we would need, it's a special grammatical feature, you know, of a lexical unit that it is in fact. So for an idiom, we could say that it's a fragile idiom. It's its linguistic status, the status in the language. For the result, I don't know how we could say, maybe it's, because it's about the phraseology, right, of this lexeme. Its phraseology is special. You see from this idiom where it comes from, until actually many years later it's disappeared. So yeah, that's the issue, and that's why for the French lexical network or the English lexical network, I would like, but I would, you see, we need more theory out of observation. So it would be great to have a project, say, on like French, Spanish, English, but it has to be collective project, but each language is handled by native speakers. So we can really collect data and look at what's going on, and then we can make a decision. Because actually, American Heritage has a good intuition. I don't know if they did it on purpose. Maybe the left hand didn't talk to the right hand, and then we ended up with this thing. But I don't know. But if they did it on purpose, they should have mentioned what they were doing. Yeah. That's really what's interesting now. But it takes more observation than what we have. Thank you for the question. I'm glad I read it, because it's something I missed.
So thank you very much for this really inspiring conference, brilliant. I have the same question as the previous speaker. In reality, it's related with the autonomy of the new word, because I was thinking about floor. When you say in English, the floor is yours. This floor is independent. Can we pass the floor, have the floor? And the same is in Spanish, we have palabra. Tener la palabra, equivalent to turn, no? And I was thinking that, okay, in Spanish, tener la palabra, pasar la palabra, so we have to consider that it's a collocation because there are several verbs which can combine with palabra, but independent as such, it's not. So there are certain restrictions, yeah. No? And, okay, so it's confirmed.
Yeah, but it's because we are quite well equipped for accounting for collocation controlled by a lexical unit, for the syntactic structures it controls. But we haven't developed theoretical and descriptive tools to actually account for its phraseological autonomy. So already, for example, in the French lexical network, when we describe a lexical unit that is intrinsically a collocate, we have something we call lexical status, and we have phraseological status, and we say it's a collocate. It's meant to be a magn, or it's meant, you know, it's like you do, but actually it concerns you a bit, because in fact when there is a new meaning, a new sense that becomes a phraseological sense, it's a bit like grammaticalization. So if you take to throw in English, so you throw a ball, etc. But then when you throw a party, so you need a lexical entry for throw, and you see it's almost grammaticalization, because this throw is almost, it's either a real one or an upper one of party, and of other things. So we describe that is not fully autonomous, because it is used mainly as a collocate. And those guys, they are base of a collocations, but they have the same kind of restrictions you find for lexical units that are collocate. They are not fully autonomous. So usually you write things like call for a verbal governor, you know, etc., etc. So, but we need more cases, and we need to develop a good encoding of this, because what we do usually, you say, usually comes with a verb, but it means it has to have a support verb. It's difficult to use it without a support verb. So lapin by itself is not that easy to use. So it's very easy to use it with poser un lapin, ou se faire poser un lapin, etc. So it seems to call for a colloquy, a verbal colloquy. But yeah, but it's, you understand, I mean, it's basically it's a matter of observing more, gathering information, and then you decide on how you describe this in the most pedagogical way. Because people have to know. They have the right to know.
And the other way around, for example, if you have, I was thinking in Spanish, pegar un golpe. Pegar there is like a support verb, no? To
Yeah.
give a blow. And you can use pegar independently as to beat. So I was wondering which one was first. And no, of course, I don't ask that question, but it could be just the verb, which is taking the meaning of the whole expression.
Yeah, that's another issue, is that I gave examples. I say, if it has a structure such as that, then this kind of split can be expected. But I don't know all the cases. But I'm sure there are more than just this case I described. So yeah, we could anticipate, because a verb can be the base with a non-collocate. That's possible also. So I don't know. And does it work? Can we find examples of noun phrases also like that? So I don't know. That's why it has to be studied. I just presented what I know is there, but there's much more. That's for sure.
Thank you very much.
Unfortunately, that's all the time we had. We still have 2 more sessions, so we have to stop here. Thank you, Alain.
Thanks a lot.
So now we have the 2 parallel sessions. The first one is here, and the second one is in the room D1, which is very close to here. Thank you for your patience.
Okay.
Yes. Je commence maintenant?
Non, tout à l'heure.
Ah, ok.
3.
Les adapteurs.
Ouais, c'est bon.
Ah, bien. Toi, t'es une fille sérieuse, t'as mis le logo de la TIF et tout.
Mais je vois, j'ai pas mis si taille.
Ouais, t'as pas mis le groupe de recherche?
Non.
There's a break?
No, not now.
So we are supposed to start like that?
Yeah, there is a break because some people are changing room.
Maybe they were so excited by my talk that they needed to go to the bathroom. Je t'ai présenté à Bégonia, non?
Not yet.
Oh, Bégonia, c'est vraiment quelqu'un à connaître. Et elle a l'air assez sérieuse comme ça et tout, mais elle a un sens de l'humour un petit peu, finalement, en soutenance de thèse, je pense qu'elle parlait comme ça, très bien, un peu, en plus c'est très élégant quand elle parle espagnol, c'est très littéraire presque, mais pas snob. Et je sais plus qu'elle parlait de marcher dans la mer, mais elle a utilisé le mot miel. C'est tellement surprenant.
Well, the next speaker will be Veronica Lux-Pogodala with the presentation Lexical Networks at School, an experimental exploration of nouns expressing feelings with 10-year-old students.
So, hello, can you hear me if I speak like this? Okay. So, I'm glad to work with Alain for almost 15 years now as a lexicographer. It's how I would define myself today. And I'm working at ATILF, which is a research lab in France, in Nancy. So, what I'm going to talk about today is my work with school teachers. So in 2018, school inspectors and heads of schools and teachers of secondary and primary schools came to my lab because they have heard of our work in lexicography, and they came to ask for our help, our support, to help them to teach better, to teach vocabulary better. As they said, they reported a very limited vocabulary in their pupils, to the extent that it affected their learning in all disciplines. This is, of course, not very original, as it has been observed in other countries, like shown by the Oxford reports on this topic. And this was, of course, not new by the time, as it has been said, observed 20 years before, and maybe before, for example, by Ophélie Tremblay and Alain himself. As when Ophélie Tremblay observed this 20 years before, she said that teachers wanted to teach vocabulary, but they felt that they still missed a methodology and tools for vocabulary teaching. So she undertook to fill this gap with the belief that lexicography could provide useful foundation for this, as another person called Jacqueline Picoche did before her. And it's also my own belief that lexicology and lexicography can help teaching vocabulary and learning vocabulary. And so I will briefly provide an overview of what some people did before. So a pioneer in France is Jacqueline Picoche, a lexicographer and linguist interested in teaching vocabulary. She provided a methodology for what she called leçons de vocabulaire, and she recommended to start with a trigger word, and she called this explore une grappe de mots, so network of associated words. And she also made resources, lexicographical resources available, freely available on the web, and with the recommendation about the school year in which you should learn or teach the different vocables. And many teachers I've worked with had tried Picoche methodology. More recently, Ophélie Tremblay, so in Montreal, has also developed a lexicologically enlightened teaching approach. I don't know if you can call it this way. And in her PhD, in her dissertation, Ophélie identified a set of fundamental notions in lexicology which are useful for teaching and learning vocabulary. And since then, Ophélie, with students of hers, are regularly publishing in some professional journals in Montreal, in Canada, to teach teachers these lexicological notions, especially in a journal called Vivre le primaire. And Ophélie and colleagues also provide sets of vocabulary or lists of vocabulary. So our own approach consisted in first training some teachers, so voluntary teachers, to some fundamental notions in lexicography. That's what Alain and I did beginning in 2018. So we designed some special memo for this aim for the teachers, and we spent about a little bit more than 20 hours with them. And at the same time, I went in these teachers' classes to see what was happening, and so we could illustrate all notions taught by examples, real examples, and this very much helped to convince teachers of the reality of the notions. For example, I could illustrate the notion of polysemy with problems or difficulties occurring in their classes. And then, since 2021, I'm doing on-demand coaching for some of the teachers, pre-trained teachers, to lexicologize their class practice. So what I'm usually doing is helping them introduce a particular notion to their pupils, or change a little something in the way they teach French or sometimes math out of lexicological reasons. So I'm aiming at bridging theoretical linguistic concepts with practical methodology, practical educational methodologies. So on one side, you have the teachers asking, what should I teach differently out of lexicological reasons, and how exactly? On the other side of the bridge, you have the lexicographer trying to identify which lexicological knowledge is useful in each case exactly, and how should it be communicated to pupils, sometimes explicitly and sometimes implicitly. And then all of this happens in schools, so those shall comply with the school curriculum, and those shall comply with the class learning plan and timetable. So now, in order for you to understand what exactly the bridging consists of, I'm going to give you just the bits of just the relevant bits of theoretical framework, and I'm very lucky because Alain explained a lot of it before. So the framework, the theoretical framework, is the same framework as Ophélie Tremblay's framework. It's a framework of meaning text theory, of explanatory combinatorial dictionaries, lexicography, and it's a framework of lexical systems, of Alain Polguère's lexical system. In such a system, each lexical meaning is described essentially in a relational fashion, and so each lexical unit is characterized above all by a set of connections, both paradigmatical and syntagmatical relations, and all this is modeled using lexical functions. So here you have some examples of paradigmatic lexical functions, which connect a lexical unit and its semantic derivatives. You have functions like synonym, antonyms, nominalizations, verbalizations, or typical accent. And the other ones are syntagmatic lexical functions, which connect a lexical unit to its collocates. And so you have functions like intensifier, the one Alain just mentioned, like magn, or support verbs, or realization verbs. Here, you can see how we use these functions to describe, in the réseau lexical du français, to describe the connection for the lexical item colère, one. And so, probably you can't, well, you can see. you have first synonyms, and then generic. But you see that they all have formal names. Maybe this one is easier to understand. This is the part of the previous connections as can be visualized using a spider legs. And so here you see colère 1, and for example, it's connected to synonym. Yeah, this one, for example, fureur, générique, sentiment, émotion, or to support to verb like éprouver, ressentir de la colère. Okay, now to build the bridging, we had to decide, the teacher with whom I'm working and I had to decide which relation, which connections we were going to consider. So for semantic relations, it was quite easy because we just have to stick to the school curriculum. And so we decided to focus on synonyms, not very original, and antonyms. Also, so for example, joie is an antonym for tristesse. And A1 and able1, which in the school terminology are called words of the same family, like you have for peur, apeuré, and peureux. For collocations, it was not as easy because the school curriculum says nothing. So we decided to focus on frequent collocations, and to define frequent, we relied on antidote, on what antidote says, and we also selected collocations modeled with standard lexical functions. So in particular, we choose to focus on some verbal collocates used to tell that a person X is experiencing and reacts to a particular feeling, like in French, X a peur, X tremble de peur. We also selected adjectival collocates to tell how a person reacts to a feeling, like X est blanc de peur, white for fear, et fou de peur is crazy for fear. All this means that the feeling is very intense. And also verbal collocates to tell that the effect of a feeling has on the experiencer, like la peur paralyse X. Then we choose to use mind maps as an approximation of network, because mind maps is something that pupils are used to. And it's a good way to organize information visually and to show relations between elements. And also they can be drawn by hands, which is very good in school. And last, to compensate for a possible lack of knowledge by some pupils, we designed corpora. So for each noun, a corpora of about 10 sentences, and in each sentence you had a collocate of a noun. Or sentences like Ben entra dans le couloir sombre avec une peur bleue. So Ben entered the dark corridor with the blue fear, intense fear. So that's it. So now, what did we learn? So overall, the experiment ran as designed, and we started. Okay, we started with a collaborative and collective work to build stuff on the blackboard, and ended, because in school you have to, we ended with individual work, with each pupil working on his own on a sheet of paper for assessment, because it's how school is working in France. Here you can't see it, so I've made a copy of it. It's what we collectively built. So here you see the part of the mind map with antonym and synonym and words of the same family, adjectives of the same family, so as collectively built. And on the other side, you see the collocations. And you see already that it doesn't very much look like a map anymore. It's more difficult to draw as a map. So all verbal collocates to express what the joy is making in a person, which the pupils called P rather than X, but it's the same person. La joie emporte P, la joie envahit P, la joie illumine P, etc. So, I have to. The part of the experiment with semantic derivatives was the easier part, because pupils already knew, though they don't really master, but they already knew synonyms and antonyms and words of the same family. And most of them could draw a semantic mind map to represent this. Though, when time came for individual work, we had to provide a form with pre-structured map, because they were too slow in drawing and writing. So here you see what a pupil alone did in the evaluation, during the evaluation session. And she gave a synonym, an antonym, and a related adjective. So the most challenging part of the experiment was with collocate, of course. So the first observation is that it's very difficult to ask question in a way simple enough. Because, for example, it's very difficult to ask a question about a support verb without using the terms verb and subject. And these are difficult for 10-year-old pupils, though they should know this. So very rapidly, we tried to use gapped sentence. I don't know the real English for gapped sentence, but gapped sentence. And also we try to draw on analogy, because this is what works well. Drawing on analogy worked well orally when we worked collectively, but it was more difficult when we came to the individual work and forms, because models had to be in a written form, and I'll show you. This is the form we used for the individual work, and here you see this part of it is the model. So the evaluation was on tristesse, so sadness, and the model was on fear, which we had seen before. And only the best readers in the class could take benefit of the model to feel this part. So analogy works well, but we still don't really know how to present the models in a good manner. And the last observation is that using the corpora, was also fine in the collective sessions because each pupil was given just one sentence, but in the individual phase, each pupil had 10 sentences, and then it was much more difficult. And again, only the very best readers in the class could use the corpora. But it was the most challenging part of the experiment, but it was also the most motivating one, and for me, also the most rewarding one. First, because we highlighted common and discriminant collocates during the process, and this proved very interesting for pupils. They really show interest for this. For example, you have blanc de peur and blanc de colère, so same collocate, but you have vert de peur and rouge de colère to express intensification. Also, as is well known to linguists, and also the famous topic in research on English as a foreign language, there are metaphor themes appearing when studying these collocates, and this the pupils very much enjoyed. For example, they noticed that in French you speak about feelings very much as about illnesses, like you can say être aveuglé par la colère, so blind for colère. Fou de joie, paralysé de peur. And a last thing which was clear is that exploring collocates of a noun works as a catalyst in defining this noun, and so both processes should be better synchronized. We did it separately, but we should do it differently. Also, what was very rewarding was that we could show the lexical network to the pupils after each session, and so they got a sufficient intuition of what lexical networks are to recognize work similar to theirs in this. And so, for example, they said, you see that linked to peur, there are the verbs trembler, which you see somewhere here, yeah, trembler, and yeah, it was, of course, they very much enjoyed this one. But they could recognize what they found themselves and say, oh, this one we didn't find, this one we found. And because I'm very short of time, as a conclusion, I just have this slide, but it's real. It's work to be continued. Thank you for attention, and if you have any questions.
Thank you, Veronica. Any questions? Y a-t-il des questions en français aussi?
Yeah, I'm wondering too, and presently I'm experimenting with older students and in multilingual contexts, and I don't know yet, but I hope so. But I think it's very much possible to do this with young pupils. Only you have to find the right way, and so you have to be pedagogically much more inventive. Find ways for them not to have to draw on not to have to write so much. But I don't know yet how you do this, but I'm sure you can do it. Yeah. Yes?
Very quickly, can you go back to the slide number 13, please? Okay. Are those
Say,
are those shapes meaning anything? The shapes where the words are written?
yeah.
Yes. Do they mean anything?
The shapes, yes, this means lexical unit, so round, and this is the name of the relation.
Okay.
So sometimes you have antonym, then it's very simple. I don't have a simple name for this one.
That's what I would. Because we use a graphic grammar in our method, where the different shapes, geometrical shapes, represent the different grammatical categories.
Yeah.
But I was just wanting to know which is the let's say the relationship between the selection of your shapes. It has nothing to do with the grammatical category. It's just the relationship inside.
It has nothing to do with grammatical category, but it has a meaning.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
This is just an idea that came into my head. Have you tried using words already printed on paper? The children sort of move them around, that way they could do it just by recognition and not having to write.
Yeah, I'd like to try this. So I wanted to buy something like this with stickers. And you could also yeah, or in electronic form. But it's, yes.
In my first life, I wrote a book about learning vocabulary, but I have always had a doubt in the bottom of my heart about if vocabulary can be taught. I don't know.
Well, I hope so. Yes?
I have a small question. Thank you for the presentation. I think it can work very well with the maps and mind maps. We also use them with second language learners who reply to a question, and it describes also lexical relations. And I was wondering whether you tried to use paraphrase reformulation when teaching this, because when you do this, this can come with the production, language production.
In this experiment, we didn't, but I think we'll have to. Yeah. Yes.
Another question?
Kind of an answer about this. There's always this kind of issue of the lexicon is almost so complex, and how can you teach vocabulary? But I think that it's not so much that they will have to ingest as many words as possible, but I think that by actually making them aware of the process of connection or the system of connections between a few lexical units that could even be taken almost at random, then you actually plant a seed that makes it possible for them, when they will be confronted with actual speech, to, something will happen. It will be a chain reaction. Because whenever you work on a word, the day after or in the afternoon, you hear about that word. It's always like that. So like I had to work on bravo, the polysemy of bravo, because there is an antiphrasis meaning of bravo. That means, in fact, really, that's very shitty what you have done. So, bravo, okay? And just like on the plane coming to here, there was this flying attendant, she dropped something, and the other one said, bravo, madame, vous êtes muté sur Transavia, you are transferred to Transavia. And it's always, so you do this so that when they will be confronted with something, then they will recognize something they have learned about the functioning and organization of the lexicon. And then this will snowball. So I think that's why it's very important.
Thank you.
Not otherwise you learn by speaking. Real.
Yeah, that's it. For me, it was very impressive in school that when you're beginning to talk about polysemy and so on to pupils, the next days they come to you and they say, I've heard this, and is it polysemy? Or I've heard this is it a locution? And really, they enjoy it.
Okay. Our next speakers will be Isabel Durán y Eva Lucía Jiménez. Okay, we are running out of time, so we begin right now. The presentation is titled Are Verbs Specialized Units of Meaning? The Case of English Motion Verbs in the Adventure Tourism Discourse.
Okay, so thank you very much. Thank you for being here and attending this session. As the presenter said, this is the title of the presentation, and we'll be presenting my colleague, Eva Lucía Jiménez, and me, coming from the University of Córdoba. This is the overview of the presentation. First, we started with some background and previous work, just to contextualize the research, also presenting the objectives, and then my colleague will continue with the methodology and analysis of the results. The background. When talking in general languages, it's clear that we also have to study verbs. And when talking about specialized meaning or specialized languages, there are lots of different authors that do not consider verbs as specialized units that are worth studying. But in this case, we consider that they are conveners of specialized meaning, following several authors. And we started some years ago, we started studying these kind of verbs. Also, we followed some of the ideas that verbal terms are paramount in the language of adventure tourism, based on some specific studies, and also that verbs are semantic units that represent the participant in a type of situation. So the argument structure of a verb is interesting to study and provide some information, interesting information that help us understand the way they are used, and also the meaning of this specific unit and also the other unit that are used in the same context. This is the background of this study, and also the previous work was being carried out on verbs in the language of adventure tourism. There are several studies, as I said before. We've been analyzing this kind of units for some years now. So these are some things we have discovered in our previous studies. So first one is that the predominance of motion verbs over other type of verbs in this specific domain. Verbs like climb, trek, hike, or walk as well. The existence of motion verbs conveying actual motion, fictive motion, and both. So climb, for example, can be can have an actual motion, a real motion, being a person climbing a mountain, but also can be a fictive because a road can climb something. This is fictive because there is no real motion. And others have both meaning, like the example I provided, this climb, but also a run or different kind of verbs. So this is also another discovery we've been discovered in our studies, in previous studies. And also the other one, the last one, is about phraseology, phraseological productivity of motion verbs. This is also something we've been analyzing. Lucia, my colleague here, is an expert in phraseology. She's been analyzing together, but especially she has been analyzing the productivity, mainly collocation, of these motion verbs. So, having said the context of this study, we also present the objective. So general objectives of these presentations is to contribute to the description of the language used in the adventure tourism from a lexicosemantic approach. And the other one is to highlight the degrees of specialization of motion verbs employed in this tourism segment. So, as I said before, there are lots of authors indicating that, well, verbs are not a specialized unit in specialized domains, but we're following those that consider that they do. And here we want to study this degree of specialization they provide. So the specific objective of this study is to identify similarities and differences in both the meaning and the argument structure of motion verbs when used in the specialized language as opposed to when used in general language. And to do so, we're analyzing the verbs included in the Adventure Dictionary. This is the online resource we've been developed for some years now, based on the terminology of the language of adventure tourism. It's a bilingual resource, English-Spanish. It started when I had a stay at the University of Montreal with Marie-Claude Long. And also we're considering the verbs included in this dictionary, specialized resource, with FrameNet. That's a general, it's well-known, general resource, the English version, and trying to compare and see these similarities and differences in these motion verbs we've been studying. So now my colleague can continue with the methodology.
Okay, so with this objective in mind, just to find these similarities and differences between these two resources, we follow like three main steps. So first of all, we selected a set of motion verbs. So this selection is explaining another piece of work by the both of us. These motion verbs were extracted from our specialized corpus, which is AdvenCore, the corpus of adventure tourism. This is made of promotional text. And we just follow this lexicosemantic approach to study both their meaning but also their argument structure as represented in Dico Adventures. My colleague said these are bilingual resources. So then we just follow the same type of analysis in FrameNet, because remember we want to analyze both similarities and differences in the specialized language of adventure tourism but also in the general language. And then we just compared the results to see precisely these differences and similarities. So just very briefly for you to know, maybe if you don't know, just a few details. So Dico Adventure, as Isabel said, is this online bilingual lexicosemantic resource. So this is based on the corpus I mentioned before, AdvenCore, and this is concept-based. So it means that we create one lexical entry for every new meaning, even though the term might be the same as climb. So basically, we represent linguistic, pragmatic, and semantic information of lexical units. So this is important for you to understand that this is about lexical units. And in every entry, we just have a structure which contains 5 main sections. So you can read through, but anyway, I'm going to show you one example. As for FrameNet, you may know that this is based on the theory of frame semantics by Fillmore. This is also online. This is also corpus-based, basically on the BNC. And they have, this is not updated at all, but still they have like plenty of sentences annotated, plenty of semantic frames. And the main idea is that they represent linguistic, pragmatic, and semantic information, but this is about semantic frames. So our items of study are lexical units, but they focus on semantic frames. So they offer information about every semantic frame. They include the definition, they include the frame elements, core and non-core frame elements, but also example sentences and frame-to-frame relations. So just for you to see how it looks like, so you have an entry from the Adventure. This is about upsale. So we'd say that this is like the meaning number 1 in case we found, although we didn't, a fictive motion meaning. This is basically about actual motion. So we find like five main sections. So the definition and the argument structure. So remember, these are object of study in this presentation. Then we focus on the different frame elements and the linguistic realizations. We use like more specific names for the frame elements, which they are adapted to our specialized discourse. So we show equivalence because it is bilingual, as we mentioned before. We show context, raw context, annotated context in terms of the frame elements, but also a summary, about how they realize or materialize in text. And then we show lexical relations. So depending on the verb we're analyzing, we might find more or maybe less or different lexical relations. So as I mentioned before, FrameNet is more about semantic frames. So this one is the semantic frame of motion. So we find a definition, so we find all the frame elements. They are highlighted in different colors depending on the frame element. So we find whether they are core, non-core. We also find as context which are annotated. And then if we scroll down, we can see the lexical units which evoke these frames and so on. So after this introduction to the methodology, we are moving on to the analysis of the results. So when we went through the 57 lexical units in our work, we discovered like 3 main different scenarios. So the first one was that we found both the same meaning and the same argument structure in both resources. Remember, the Coadventure versus FrameNet. So we found 36 verbs, and a couple of examples are hike and arrive. The second scenario was about finding a different meaning and maybe a different argument structure in every resource. So here we found 11 verbs, something like glide and slide. And the last scenario, which really supports our idea that, we're covering a specialized discourse, is that these motion verbs were included in the Coadventure. They were like key terms in our discourse of study, but they were not gathered in FrameNet. So here we discovered 10 verbs on something like upsail or rappel. So let's focus on the first scenario, where you can see these verbs showing the same meaning and the same argument structure in both resources. So we have the example of hike. The framework, this included self-motion. So we provide a definition in the Coadventure. So they provide a definition of the frame, remember, in FrameNet. And then they share the same core frame elements. Okay, when we say core, we mean that they are necessary to understand the meaning of the whole thing. Okay, like when you think of hike, automatically all the frames, frame elements are activated. Okay, they belong to the meaning of the verb. So as you can see, we find the same frame elements. We use, in some cases, different names because in the Coadventure, we use tourist because it's more specific. They say self-mover in FrameNet, and also we use place instead of area, or we use destination instead of goal. But still, they are just the same, as you can see. So a couple of examples for hike. We just discovered that path is the most recurrent frame element in the context. So you can see on the screen 4 main examples when this is used in a transitive way or intransitive in both resources. Having path as a frame element, as a belonging to the sentence, okay? In here in C, we don't have hike because it wasn't gathering in FrameNet, but still you can use hike in this case. Fred hiked the narrow passage, for example. As for the second scenario, as I told you before, this is about having different meanings or maybe different argument structures in every resource. So we focus here on glide. So for glide, in the Coadventure, it belongs to the operate vehicle frame, whereas in FrameNet, it belongs to the motion frame. So as you can see, we define this in the Coadventure as tourist as a subject, so he moves smoothly and effortlessly through the air or maybe the water, which is the path, on a vehicle without engine. Okay, so we include this vehicle in the definition, and then we also include place, source, and destination. So in many cases, of course, the frame element vehicle without engine is implicit to the meaning of the verb. In this case, of course, glide. Yeah? And then in FrameNet, they use remember motion, so they focus on the entity. Some entity, which is the theme, starts out in one place, which is the source, ends up in another place, which is the goal. They cover the path, and so on. So, as you can see, we have different frame elements. We have 6 in the quadventure and we have 7 in FrameNet. And as you can see, we also focus more on the vehicle, as I told you before. So you have some examples in here. I mentioned again that the focus on a vehicle with our engine in the quadventure is implicit in many cases. So we're going to be using tourist as the subject of the sentence, so this tourist moves, whereas in FrameNet, the subject is going to be mainly the entity that is moving, okay, which is called the theme. So as you can see on the example, we have, for example, A, you will glide through trees to encounter blah, blah, blah. So here the subject is you, and for us, you is the tourist. And then we have in C, an example taken from FrameNet. So here the plane flew over the city. So in here the vehicle, which is the plane, is the subject. Yeah, so remember, for us in the adventure, the subject is the tourist, whereas in FrameNet, the subject is going to be more about the vehicle or even an object. As you can see in D, the balloon floated for hours. So this is the second scenario, but as I told you before, we found 3. So the third scenario is where these motion verbs are included only in our resource, in the adventure. So here we have the example of abseil and rappel. So they just have the same meaning, but rappel is mostly used in American English. So we've defined this, they belong to the self-motion with a safety instrument. So we really focus on the idea of having a safety instrument to perform this activity. This not gather, as I told you before in FrameNet, and we define this as a tourist goes down a waterfall, which is a direction, or follows a path to the ground, which is a destination, using a harness and ropes, safety instrument, fixed at a higher point, which is the source. So we find 6 different frame elements, which are core to the meaning of the verb, and here you find a couple of examples. Belonging to each verb, we have abseil and we have also rappel. And as you can see, the safety instrument is implicit, so in most of the cases we didn't find this one in the context, but still we could find some. Like B, for example, if you are going to be abseiling during the canyoning trip, then you'll need a harness. So here the focus is on the safety instrument, and also in D we could find the safety instrument with the verb rappel. So after these 3 scenarios and results, we're moving on to the conclusions. So now my colleague will continue.
Thank you. Yeah. So conclusions, there are several. Well, this is the summarization of the study, an analysis of 57 motion verbs, and comparing those in the adventure and FrameNet, as Lucia said before. And we found 3 different situations: same meaning and same arguments, 36 verbs like hike or arrive. Different meanings or argument structure, 11 verbs. They were found in FrameNet, but with a different approach from the specialized language. And then motion verbs that were only included in the specialized resource, and 10 verbs. Abseil, rappel, parasail. There's some very specific verbs that are not commonly used in general language. So these are the objectives achieved. The identification of similarities and differences, by carrying out this study, we've been identifying these elements. We've also provided this contribution to the description of the language of adventure tourism from a different approach, as we've been doing in previous studies, and also the analysis of the degree of specialization of motion verbs. It's true that in this specialized language there are lots of verbs, motion verbs, that are also included in the general language. In total, we found 47 verbs found in FrameNet, which is a general resource, but there were 10 specific verbs, only motion verbs, found for this general language, for this specific specialized language. So in this case, we also consider this specialized domain. So further studies, well, we can always carry out this study in other languages, like Spanish, is a native language, and also analyze other kind of verbs, or carried out other some comparative and contrastive studies in both languages, English, Spanish, or including French, or their own languages always. Good. This is just from our part, and I don't know if you have any question.
Okay, any question? Can you?
that is, what are the criteria for the selection of these solution groups?
Yeah, so this is explained in previous work by us. So it just started when we wanted to find out collocations. So as she's mentioned before, we performed a deep study of collocations. So we established different criteria. So first of all, the verbs should occur at least 2 times in the corpus, because it was going to be the threshold established for the collocations afterwards. So then they had to really represent the domain of adventure tourism, because in some cases you couldn't find that in the context. So we really were selecting the context very carefully. So they had to show so. And then in this case, they showed examples of actual motion, but in some cases also examples of fictive motion. So after just covering or just taking into account all the different criteria, we just got, or we just selected 57 of them, because they had to fulfill all these criteria. Yeah, this is plain somewhere else, so that's why we didn't stop at this point, but thank you for reminding us.
Another criterion that we also used in the selection of these verbs is that we have to found, I remember, 15 contexts, rich knowledge contexts that provide information about the use of this domain. Mm-hmm. This is also another criteria. Okay, you all. Sorry.
Yeah. Why do you need to put tourist as an element in your list of elements? Because tourist is so specific, and it sounds weird to say that tourist is embedded in the meaning of hike. I understand there is a conceptual connection in the area you are studying, but it's difficult to say that to hike is something that a tourist does, or any of those verbs. After all, even in this field, and you have a text where they talk about professional climbers who are actually accompanying as guides tourists, so not only the tourist. So, is it really required? Because it sounds strange.
Yeah. In a previous study, we also provided a representation, a semantic representation of the domain. And the main category related to users is agent. And agents can be divided in tourist, instructor, on the different people that are involved in the activities. So the tourist is the tourist is one of the roles we use to indicate the person that is carrying out this activity, because we're only talking about tourism. No.
But the tourist is not necessarily the agent. If the tourist is killed by a grizzly, so...
Yeah, but
we don't consider that verb. And also, the corpus is composed of promotional tourist text. So it's just specifically focused on tourism text.
Yeah, in the context, when we went through the context, it was always about the tourist. So that's why in this previous study, 2016, she analyzed this domain. And it was mainly about the tourists, all the time, because they have promotional text, so they invite you to do so.
Okay.
Yeah.
That could be another name, but that's the idea. The main category was the agent, so then to classify the different people involved, and that's why we use tourist as a role.
Yeah, more specific to the frame. A frame specific, we could say.
Yeah, but the more specific you are, the less you can transfer what you do to a field that will be close, but actually if you want to reinvest what you have done with some very technical verbs into modeling the terminology of rock climbing, then you see, just because you have tourists, you won't be able to keep this. Because
Yeah. That's true.
Okay.
Thank you.
I was wondering what's the situation in Spanish. Have you noticed any preliminary discovery?
The studies we've carried out in Spanish are very few, mainly focused on collocations. So So it's true that the use of, the variability of verbs is less than in English.
Yeah.
The number of verbs.
Yeah, but we haven't compared yet like the argument structures, or we're dealing with this. Yeah. Yeah.
Pues it's lunchtime, hora de comer. Hora española de comer.
L'Université Martin Queens.